Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon on perceptions of laboratory animal facility managers regarding institutional transparency. And this is brought to you today by Michael Brunt. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, thank you, Candace. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, there we go. And Candace, can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the session today. I would just like to start. What's going on here? There we go. I'd just like to start off as I begin. I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the UBC campus in Vancouver on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So before I get into the project that I did, I'd like to situate this specific work in a broader theoretical framework of the transparency discourse. There was a question that was asked during Dr. Leach's keynote a week ago, where someone asked in the chat, is this really transparency? And I feel like it's an important question. It's an important question to ask. And I want to touch on some concepts that get to the heart of these things, because different people can view transparency in different ways. And I feel that one community can think that they're being really transparent, say, for example, in the lab animal community, where if we're beginning to share more information with the general public about animal numbers, about assessment reports, things along those lines. And so we're feeling like we're moving into a place where we're sharing much more information and being much more transparent. But then other communities can accuse us of not being transparent enough. And I think it's important for us to think about that the lens that we view transparency through really matters. And being able to know that other people see transparency in a different way is also a really important starting point. So getting accurate information out to the public is extremely important. And I know from my past, I used to get really frustrated whenever I would want to, or whenever I would talk to people about the use of animals in science, and I felt like they had inaccurate information and it was uninformed, and it was really frustrating for me. And I was tired of seeing this wrong information out there. And if I really thought that, like, if I got my truth out there and people saw and understood what I was experiencing, that they would be able to understand my truth and be able to know what it is that I see on a daily basis with what I'm working with. And that is why I got involved in doing outreach a number of years ago and was doing that work before I started my PhD. And I spoke a lot, and I also did a lot of work to help others within the community communicate effectively. And I feel it's really important to get this information out into the public, and it's something that needs to continue to do. And I feel like that is something that we as a community should continue to do. But just to put it into a little bit of a perspective, this sort of communication is also well characterized in the literature. And I just want to expand on that just a little bit, where this is something that's known as the knowledge deficit model. And it is made up of three key factors. And the one is that there's the belief that there is a misinformed other. And this other needs knowledge, needs information to be able to properly understand a topic and then be able to make an informed decision about it. The second piece to that is that this other has a limited scientific literacy and they need help to be able to understand what information they are being given and to be able to interpret it correctly. The third piece to this is that this group of people will process the information in a rational and logical way. And this is something that is extremely popular in science communication. For scientists, the lab animal community does this. Regulators do this, and governments really like this sort of knowledge deficit model because of the logical nature that it is. However, one of the downfalls is that research has been showing that a purely educational approach like this is not likely to be successful. Because what it is that with this knowledge, you haven't addressed some of these underlying issues. So for example, have you ever talked to family and friends or someone and you've told them, provided them with some information and they say back to you, like, I totally get what you're saying. I understand, but I still just don't like it. And this is because the knowledge that you've given hasn't addressed this underlying value conflict that is often at the heart of their concerns. And you haven't addressed, I guess we could call it like an ick factor. And most people have an underlying ethical framework that judges actions for themselves and not the moral worth of the result of those actions. Okay, what I mean by that is they judge the act of killing an animal or causing pain to an animal completely independent of if it's going to cure disease. And these are two very different ethical theories, and we can talk about these a long time, but they're fundamentally different because of the way in which they judge the morality of those actions. And it's important to recognize that no amount of knowledge can get rid of that ick factor. And that's because the consequentialism or like the result of that doesn't come naturally to people. This is something that you need to either be trained in, like whether that be through philosophy or in science, we're trained on the job or when we're conducting research. And while this does seem extremely logical to most people in the lab animal community, this does not come easily and is not accepted by others very effectively. So this is something we just need to always remember whenever we're talking about transparency. It's the lens in which it's viewed is super important, especially when we're trying to educate others. So this is just one piece that I wanted to address before I got into the broader thing of the study. So why is transparency important? The scientific community conducts research under something that is called a social license, and that enables us to participate in activities that would otherwise be considered unacceptable in other situations. For example, conducting research on stray pets was once okay, and now it's no longer socially acceptable to do. In a different way, it is socially acceptable to kill a mouse on a glue trap in your house, but it is not okay to do that in a research setting. So these views that the public has to be able to have a social license to conduct research on animals are very dynamic. And permission is not always guaranteed that it's going to continue or stay the same. So there have been calls from both the public and scientific communities to increase transparency. And there needs to be continually efforts to renegotiate this very dynamic permission to use animals. And through that is engaging in public discussion. So this is the backdrop. Why would we need to do these things in addition to the social license? What they find is institutions that are more transparent or have a reputation of being more transparent are more trusted. They also find that there's an improved perception of the people that conduct research and the research itself, the more transparent an institution is. So why did I want to look at managers in the study that I'm presenting here today? Well, managers have a direct interaction with a wide breadth personnel in their animal care and use program. They're in an interface between researchers and animal care staff, and they exert operational control of their facilities, but have little influence of the institutional policies that they have to adhere to. Their interpretation of this institutional culture of transparency can influence others that use their facilities. And by describing these similarities and differences, we might be able to lead to a better understanding of what strategies could be effective at transmitting transparency values throughout an institution. So what did we do? Or what is the objectives? The objectives were to describe perceptions of transparency among animal research facility managers and how these perceptions influence their experiences. I interviewed 12 facility managers within one Canadian, large Canadian animal care and use program. 6 of these managers were at campus facilities, and 6 of these managers were managing facilities at affiliated hospitals. I used a semi-structured open-ended interviews, audio recorded and transcribed the data. And then the participants were also able to review their transcripts to ensure accuracy and that their thoughts and intentions were communicated appropriately. What did I find? I found that 4 themes emerged from the participant interviews. The first theme was communication strategies around transparency. The second was transparency's impacts on participants, their expectations for transparency, and the last was institutional policies surrounding transparency. For the communication strategies around transparency, most of the participants described a desire to be more transparent and engaging in conversations in an effort to be transparent. There was a large focus on that transparency being to educate others. And this is looping back to the knowledge deficit model I kind of expanded a little bit more on earlier. They also assessed the intent of others and partook in shaping dialogue with others. Here's a example from participant U7. You point out that, well, do you know anyone who survived a heart attack or a stroke or was taking antibiotics? Well, that was made possible by people like me who do that work, and that involved animal models. So many of the participants described a formulaic script that was slightly modified depending upon the context. And they utilized examples of biomedical research that were purposefully tailored for individual conversations that directed discussion towards the perceived logical agreement with the participant. In these instances, language was used to influence social moral thought and to guide an interpretation of the biomedical research procedure that was under discussion. Also under communication strategies was this collegial dialogue with others. Interestingly, this was primarily seen within the university facility managers and was largely absent from the interview transcripts that came up with the hospital facility managers. The second theme that was here was the impact that either the current transparency perceptions had on participants. So primarily in the hospital facilities, the animal facility managers talked about concerns around increasing animal activism with the increase in transparency, the emotional effects of low levels of transparency in their facilities, and the impression of concealment from the public. And this is a quote from H6, participant H6. And you have to take them through 4 levels of security and whatnot. It makes you appear secretive. And I think that in itself, is problematic. All of the participants across the animal care and use programs felt that there is a need to increase transparency, but also appeared to fear the implications of increasing information in the public's possession. So participant number U11 talked I sort of waffle back and forth. I certainly don't want to hide what we do, but there seems to be some benefit to not being transparent about a location in this building on this floor. You know what I mean. So they talked about the wanting to be transparent, but then at the same time, there was legitimate safety concerns that were there. People also referred to harassment and violence that had occurred, but they referred to this as something they heard about, or years ago this had happened, or that nobody wants this sort of thing to happen. In the current context, violent actions directed towards laboratory animal professionals have dwindled worldwide since 2012. However, there is a historic legacy of harassment that has tainted the social trust in animal rights groups. And this history has likely influenced the perceptions of transparency by research animal facility managers, even in the absence of any current evidence of harassment risk right now. The fourth theme that we came across was participants' expectations for transparency. So several participants said that they did not need to have an increase in transparency within their own facility. That was something that was super common, that people felt that their facility itself was had a good level of transparency. However, there needed to be increases in broader institutional transparency. We can see here, participant H1 said, I don't know if we need to be that much different. Everybody within the center knows what we do. I guess I would like senior leadership to be slightly more supportive of this transparency. What we also saw was participant U3 said, I don't think so. I think we're pretty good when referencing their own facility. And then also said, I would be more inclined to have the university very transparent with the public. And these conflicting statements from participants around transparency were likely rooted in the participants' perspective of what impacts their facility versus what impacts the broader institution. Participants described a desire for broader institutional transparency with a cautious openness. And this is something that supports increased information dissemination with the public, while avoiding conflict with other institutional priorities. In contrast, within their own facilities, participants seem to be using a form of selective openness, and this promotes existing power structures and information control within the facility. The last section and the last theme that had emerged was primarily seen in the hospital animal facility managers. And most of these participants that managed hospital facilities stated that they had been told not to speak, or had been given the impression that it was not acceptable to speak about animal research occurring within their facility. Participant H12 said, well, the guidance I'm getting is if someone is asking questions, refer them to public relations. We're not supposed to engage that person, and I don't want to engage with them. There was some notable exceptions where there was one participant, H9, a hospital facility manager, that felt extremely supported by their institution to speak openly. So even within the, that there is themes that run through, even within there is some variation and difference. Financial concerns were also voiced by most of the hospital participants as a reason to justify information control. H8 said it can create some bad publicity, which can ripple through donations. And participant H2 talked about public perceptions can increase how the organization is funded. The majority of these participants stated that they or their institution believed that an increase in transparency could jeopardize donations for hospital foundations. And the selective release of information is often rooted in a fear of public misunderstanding of science. The last piece I wanted to touch on here was around the tainted facility. What do I mean by that? So the hospital participants had very positive perceptions of their own research facilities. Most described them as being extremely transparent for interactions between animal care staffs and researchers within their facility. However, All of these participants also perceived that the hospital itself viewed the Animal Research Center as tainted and had the potential to tarnish the institution's reputation if it was known to the public. You can see participant H2 saying, our organization is not as transparent with the public. I wouldn't say that they request that we don't promote it, but they don't. They wouldn't openly promote the fact that we have an animal research facility within that building. Hospital facility managers perceived that their workplace was stigmatized by their institution. This stigma awareness is also evident in other professions and well studied. Earlier research has demonstrated that animal research technicians feel stigmatized in their workplace at times. In contrast, to the animal facility managers, this discourse was largely absent from the university-based animal facility managers. So what does this tell us? What it tells us is that institutions, regulators, and the public should not assume that there is a uniform interpretation of transparency within an institution. There were pronounced differences between managers at hospital-based versus the university-based research facilities. However, that being said, there was also similarities and differences that existed across all participants. What I think we should take as a takeaway from this conclusion is that there needs to be ongoing discussion between managers at facility managers meetings and the promotion and supporting from an institution, because these facility managers had very different interpretations of what they perceived the institutional policies were. And it was important to make sure that they have opportunities to continue to discuss and promote that culture of transparency. So what's next? So I've currently just wrapped up interviews with university veterinarians across Canada, looking at similarities and differences to institutional transparency across Canada. I'm in the process of writing up a paper. I finished the data analysis on evaluating, soliciting broad public input on animal research protocols prospectively before they're approved. And I'm going to be starting a survey to assess Canadian attitudes and trust of oversight for the use of invertebrates in research. So trying to go into some new territory here. Not really on the transparency scale, but I've also just had a paper accepted in laboratory animals looking at the attitudes of laboratory animal professionals and researchers towards carbon dioxide euthanasia of rodents and the barriers to change. So there's lots going on, and I look forward to talking to everyone about it as soon as we can, and please always reach out. I would like to thank the funders, my colleagues, and for their support for doing this research. And I would also like to encourage everyone to kind of think about the lens in which they review the research, or that they view transparency, to try to think about it from other perspectives. I'm always available to have further discussion. I'd also like to thank my participants in all of my research studies. This would not have been able to be possible without them. And then also I'd like to, I noticed that ANCARE had sponsored this presentation, so I would like to thank them as well. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking about some questions. So thank you.
So we do have one question popping up in the Q&A. Any resources and or books for the technician that can discuss this topic that you suggest? There's so much to think about, and we definitely are looking forward to your article.
Thank you very much. Specifically around this, I would say most of the stuff that's out there currently is very is like the theoretical stuff. So there's a lot of work in the sociology areas around transparency, and some work in the UK with it. However, the way that I'm trying to tackle this is that I'm wanting to answer applied. I want to answer problems that the institution has. And while I do need to like frame it in like theoretical background, I want to answer questions like this and provide input into how we can tackle these very wicked problems that don't have easy answers. So there's not really a text or things out there, but I'm hoping that like this work that I'm doing will be able to contribute to this discussion and being able to help navigate these problems and issues that our community has.
Certainly, and I definitely think that it is. A second question that has popped up here is, how do you suggest approaching senior admin to propose changes to transparency at any institution?
Well, I recognize that as a significant challenge. And I know for me, one of the projects for my PhD was that I not only wanted to speak with managers and university veterinarians, but also senior admin. That would have been, I think, a really great insight into this transparency landscape that we have across Canada. However, that was not, I wasn't able to get access to them. So how do I suggest we do that? I suggest that people in positions where they have access to the senior admin to be able to continue that discussion with them bit by bit. The reality from what I've seen and what I've heard from different people in those positions is that things do not change overnight. It is years of discussion. It is sustained discussion and sustained encouragement to change and to increase transparency bit by bit. And I recognize that there literally is 100 things on a list that you need to talk to the senior admin with, because what, you have 20 minutes, a half an hour every month or something with them, right? And transparency might not always rank too high on it because there's so many competing priorities. But my suggestion would just be to just keep mentioning it and seize opportunities to like increase little bits here and there when you can, as a very functional way of moving this forward.
I think that's a very good point that you make too, just mentioning it and getting that ball rolling and being ready for it to take some time. We are closing out here. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A. How much do you miss the folks at U of G CAF?
Yeah, I miss. So for those that may not know, I spent nearly 20 years at the University of Guelph working there, and I miss you guys so much. It's a very fond period of my life, and it really has formed a lot of the way that I view transparency and the way that I view people and the way that I interact with people and manage people and stuff. So thank you guys. I miss you lots.
And there's just a few comments here in the chat box. Thank you, Michael, for bringing this work forward. Continually striving towards more transparency always seems like uncharted and slightly scary territory. And so we appreciate your work with it. And there's lots of thank yous here, and Mary Fowler misses you too. There are a couple of questions that I don't think we're going to get to today. Michael, I would like to move those to the Q&A section. I'll type the questions in there, and then perhaps you can go to that area on the platform and pop in an answer for us.
Okay, thank you. Yep, I'm more than happy to. And again, for everyone that's out there, as this session is closing out, just please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to continue discussions with people in an ongoing capacity. I'm continuing this research work and very wanting to continue talking about it with whomever, hopefully over a beer soon too.
Bye, everyone.